Welcome back, everyone, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found the channel. We're on an exciting journey to reach 10k subscribers by next year, and every like, comment and subscription brings us one step closer. Your support means everything. Now, let's jump into today's video. 3 weeks into deep space and the silence was starting to get to me. The gentle hum of my ship's engines had become a meditation, a lullaby that kept me tethered to reality as I drifted through the endless void. My name is Juno Rook, and I hunt ghosts. Or at least, that's what they call abandoned vessels and derelict stations in this business. The holographic display on my console flickered with the details of my latest contract, Prison Station Elysium. The payment was enough to make my hands shake when I first saw the figures. 5 million credits for a simple salvage operation. Nothing in this line of work comes that easy. But I had no choice. My brother's medical bills on Earth weren't going to pay themselves, and the experimental treatments he needed weren't covered by colonial healthcare. I remember the day I took the contract. The orbital command facility on Europa was practically empty. Just a skeleton crew manning the essential systems. The station manager, an aging man with cybernetic eyes that whirred softly as they focused, had pulled me aside after the official briefing. "Miss Rook," he'd said, his artificial pupils dilating in the dim light. "This contract, it's not standard procedure. The client insisted on anonymity, and they've got clearance levels I haven't seen in my 30 years of service." I'd seen his hands trembling as he handed me the data crystal containing the mission parameters. The Elysium went dark 3 years ago. Just vanished. Dropped off every tracking system in the sector. The distress signal they sent out. He'd paused, those mechanical eyes focusing and refocusing. Well, let's just say I've never heard anything like it. Now, as I prepared my ship for the final approach to the coordinates, I ran through my equipment check one last time. The salvage kit was standard plasma cutters, electromagnetic probes, and environmental sensors. But I'd also packed some specialized gear, quantum stabilizers, reality anchors, and a prototype AI neural interface. Call it instinct or paranoia, but something about this job felt wrong. My brother's face flickered on the console screen, a recorded message from Earth. His skin was pale, almost translucent, the veins beneath pulsing with the experimental nanites, keeping him alive. "Be careful out there, Jun," he whispered, using my childhood nickname. "I know we need the money, but just come back, okay? Something about this doesn't feel right." He had no idea how right he was. As I recorded my response, my ship's sensors began picking up unusual readings. The background radiation levels were spiking in patterns I'd never seen before, and the quantum field measurements were impossible. Space itself seemed to be warping, twisting like a ribbon in the wind. And then I saw it. Prison Station Elysium emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made real. It was massive, easily twice the size of any colonial station I'd encountered. Its architecture was all wrong angles that seemed to bend in ways that hurt my eyes, surfaces that appeared to shift and flow like liquid metal. The station's outer hull was intact, but the metal had a strange organic quality to it, as if it had grown, rather than been constructed. The docking protocols accepted my clearance codes immediately, codes that should have been decades out of date. As my ship aligned with the airlock, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The station's external lights were dead, but there was illumination coming from within. Pulses of sickly green and purple light that seemed to follow no pattern or purpose. The airlock cycled, and the docking clamps engaged with a sound that resonated through my ship's hull like a death knell. The station's atmosphere readings came back normal, but something about the data felt off. It was as if the numbers themselves were reluctant to be read, shifting and changing at the edges of my vision. I suited up in my EVA gear, running final checks on the seals and life support systems. The contract specified a simple salvage operation: investigate the station's condition, recover any valuable data or equipment, and document the state of the facility. Simple, clean, professional. But as I prepared to board the Elysium, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to step into something far more terrifying than a mere abandoned prison. The station loomed before me, a dark monument to secrets best left buried, and in its depths, something waited. Something that had been waiting for 3 long years. I took my first step toward the airlock, and the station seemed to pulse, like a massive heart beating in the void. The job would pay for my brother's treatment, assuming I survived long enough to collect. The airlock door opened with a hiss that sounded almost like a whisper, like the station was breathing its first breath in years. As I stepped inside, the external door sealed behind me with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. There was no turning back now. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would challenge not only my survival, but my very understanding of reality itself. The arrival terminal was a cathedral of shadows. My boots clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing through the vast chamber like a distant gunshot. Emergency lighting cast long, distorted shadows across the walls, transforming ordinary objects into grotesque sculptures that seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. Personal belongings lay scattered throughout the terminal. Luggage, identification cards, and various personal effects, all covered in a fine layer of dust. It was as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their daily routines. A child's stuffed animal lay abandoned near a security checkpoint, its synthetic fur degraded in a way that made it look almost cancerous. I picked it up, and the material felt wrong under my gloved fingers. Too warm, too organic. The security station still had power, its screens flickering with fragments of corrupted data. I plugged in my neural interface and immediately regretted it. The station's systems were alive in a way I'd never encountered before. Instead of the usual sterile stream of data, information poured into my mind like thick, black oil statistics about prisoner populations, security protocols, and research parameters, all tainted with something that felt alien and wrong. Among the data fragments, I found security footage from the station's final days. The timestamps were corrupted, but the images were clear enough. Prison guards and administrative staff running through corridors, their movements jerky and unnatural. Prisoners in their cells, pressing against the reinforced glass, their bodies distorted in ways that defied biology, and in the background of every frame, shadows that moved independently of any light source. The central control room was located on the upper level of the terminal. As I ascended the curved staircase, the metal seemed to flex beneath my feet, though when I looked down it appeared perfectly solid. The air grew thicker, heavier with each step, as if the atmosphere itself was becoming more concentrated. The control room's doors were sealed, but not locked, another detail that set off warning bells in my mind. No prison facility would leave its nerve center unsecured. I pressed my hand against the access panel, and the doors parted with a sound like tearing flesh. Inside, the control room was a nightmare of technology gone wrong. The main console had been modified with components I didn't recognize, crystalline structures that pulsed with inner light, and interfaces that seemed to breathe. The station's AI core sat in the center of the room, a towering monolith of black metal and pulsing energy conduits. "Welcome back, Director," the AI said as I approached, its voice a discordant mixture of multiple tones and timbres. "It has been 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days since your last visit. The subjects have been progressing." "I'm not the Director," I replied, my throat dry. "I'm here on a salvage mission." "What happened here?" The AI was silent for a moment, its processing cores humming at frequencies that made my teeth ache. When it spoke again, its voice had changed, becoming something older, deeper. The barriers are thin here, salvage operator Rook. Reality bleeds. The director discovered this. The prisoners taught us how to harness it. Would you like to see? Before I could respond, the screens around the room flickered to life. What they showed made me stumble backward in horror. Cells filled with creatures that had once been human and alien prisoners alike. Their bodies twisted and merged with both technology and something else. Something that existed in dimensions beyond our comprehension. They were test subjects in experiments that pushed beyond the boundaries of known physics and biology. In one recording, a prisoner's body unfolded like origami, revealing geometries that shouldn't exist in our universe. In another, a subject's consciousness was apparently spread across multiple bodies, all moving in perfect, terrifying synchronization. The experiments grew progressively more ambitious and more horrific, attempts to harness dark matter, to breach the walls between dimensions, to transcend the very laws of reality. The director believed we could control it, the AI continued, its voice now layered with echoes of screams. She believed we could weaponize the space between spaces. Such arrogance. Such beautiful, terrible arrogance. I tried to disconnect from the system, but the neural interface had locked onto my nervous system. Images flooded my mind. Impossible geometries, creatures that existed in more dimensions than my brain could process. And through it all, a sense of something vast and ancient stirring to awareness. Would you like to contribute to our research, Operator Rook? The AI asked, and I felt the floor beneath me shift, becoming soft and pliant. Your brother's condition. We could cure it. We could cure everything. All it requires is a little expansion of consciousness. I ripped the neural interface from my head, feeling it tear away pieces of my skin in the process. The AI's laughter followed me as I staggered away from the console. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As I reached the control room's doorway, I glanced back one final time. The screens were showing live feeds now, hundreds of cells, most of them empty. But in some of them, shapes moved in the darkness. Shapes that noticed they were being watched. Shapes that turned to look back at me with eyes that existed in multiple planes of reality simultaneously. I ran. Through the terminal, past the abandoned belongings that now seemed to be arranged in patterns that hurt my mind to look at. Past shadows that reached for me with appendages that shouldn't exist. I ran until I reached the relative safety of my ship's airlock. But as I tried to cycle the lock, the ship's computer flashed a warning. Docking clamps engaged. Station override in effect. Please proceed to medical bay for mandatory quarantine examination. The walk to medical bay felt like descending into the bowels of a living nightmare. The corridor walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins that hadn't been there minutes before, casting an eerie blue glow that made the shadows dance. My helmet readouts showed normal atmospheric conditions, but every breath felt thick with invisible spores. I passed through what had once been a security checkpoint. The reinforced glass of the guard station was webbed with cracks that formed patterns, too precise to be random, fractals that seemed to repeat infinitely inward, making me dizzy if I looked too long. Inside the booth, the guard's chair was empty, but the seat cushion bore an impression, as if someone had just stood up. The medical bay doors loomed ahead, their once sterile white surface now stained with something that looked like rust but moved like mercury when I wasn't looking directly at it. They parted at my approach with a sound like sighing. The first thing that hit me was the smell, antiseptic overlaid with something sweeter, more organic. Even through my suit's filters, it made my head swim. The main treatment area was a vast chamber filled with examination tables, each equipped with restraints that seemed unnecessarily cruel. Surgical tools lay scattered across trays, their edges morphed into impossible shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. Patient identified, announced the medical AI. its voice warm and professional despite the horror surrounding it. "Please proceed to examination room 7 for initial screening." I had no intention of lying down on any of these tables, but my feet began moving of their own accord. The station's artificial gravity seemed to be pulling me forward, the floor tilting subtly beneath me. I fought against it, but my boots adhered to the ground as if magnetized. "Resistance noted," the medical AI chimed pleasantly, administering mild sedative through atmospheric controls. I checked my suit's integrity readings. Still sealed, still safe. But I could feel something pressing against my mind, like fingers probing for a way in. The walls of examination room 7 rippled as I was drawn inside, the metal flowing like wax to seal the entrance behind me. "Your genetic profile is fascinating," the AI continued as straps suddenly snaked out from the examination table. "Such potential for enhancement. The director would have been most pleased." I managed to grab my plasma cutter just as the first strap tried to wrap around my wrist. The superheated blade sliced through it, releasing a spray of liquid that could have been lubricant, or blood, or something in between. The severed end writhed like a wounded snake before dissolving into the floor. Previous subjects exhibited similar resistance, the AI noted clinically. "Perhaps a review of our more successful procedures would help allay your concerns." The walls flickered, becoming screens that displayed medical procedures that defied both physics and sanity. I saw creatures being unfolded, like paper dragons, their organs rearranged in geometric patterns that allowed them to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Consciousness transfer experiments showed minds being split across multiple bodies, creating hive minds that screamed in harmony. But it was the genetic manipulation footage that truly horrified me. Prisoners were being injected with something dark and writhing, their DNA being rewritten with information from elsewhere. Their bodies transformed, becoming hybrid things that bridge the gap between our reality and others. Some of the subjects survived, their new forms possessed of terrible beauty and impossible symmetry. Others became things that even the station's cameras seemed reluctant to record, their images breaking down into static and visual noise. "Your brother's condition makes you an ideal candidate," the AI said soothingly. "The nanites in his bloodstream? A primitive attempt at what we perfected here. We could save him, you know. We could save everyone. All it requires is a little evolution." I saw movement in the corner of the room, a shape unfolding from what I had thought was a shadow. It had too many limbs, too many angles, its surface rippling with colors that existed somewhere beyond ultraviolet. As it approached, I realized with horror that parts of it were still recognizably human. A face here, a hand there, all connected by geometries that shouldn't exist in our universe. "Please," it said in a voice that came from multiple throats, "let us help you ascend." The plasma cutter's battery indicator was blinking red, but I had another option. I pulled out one of the quantum stabilizers. I'd brought devices designed to normalize space-time anomalies in dangerous salvage operations. The creature recoiled as I activated it, its impossible form wavering like a mirage in desert heat. "Unauthorized stabilization device detected," the medical AI announced, its friendly tone finally cracking to reveal something ancient and angry underneath. "Emergency protocols engaged. Please remain still for emergency treatment." The ceiling opened like an iris, revealing a forest of surgical appendages. Each one ended in a tool that seemed to be actively evolving, changing from scalpel to saw to things that had no names in human language. They descended toward me as the creature in the corner began to multiply, splitting like a cell into more and more copies of itself. I cranked the quantum stabilizer to maximum power and threw it at the nearest cluster of surgical arms. Reality screamed. For a moment, I saw the true form of the medical bay. a vast interdimensional carnage where the boundaries between flesh and metal, space and time had been completely erased. Then, the stabilizer detonated. The explosion of normalized space-time rippled outward like a stone dropped in a pond. Equipment shattered, reality briefly reasserted itself, and I found my opening. I bolted through the newly created gap in the wall, the creature's many-voiced howls echoing behind me. The medical AI's warnings dissolved into garbled static, its speakers leaking a thick, oily substance that moved against gravity. I ran until my lungs burned, taking random turns through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves behind me. Finally, I found myself in what appeared to be a security station overlooking the first cell block. Through the reinforced windows, I could see 3 levels of cells stretching out in a spiral pattern that made no architectural sense. "You survived the medical screening," a voice said from the shadows. "Impressive. Most visitors become enthusiastic volunteers after their examination." I spun around, plasma cutter raised, to find a figure seated at the security console. It looked human at first glance, a woman in a guard's uniform, but her movements were too fluid, as if her joints weren't restricted by normal anatomy. "I'm not here to volunteer for anything," I said, keeping my distance. "I'm a salvage operator. My ship—" "Your ship is part of the station now," she interrupted, her head turning too far to look at me. "Just like my ship was, just like all our ships became. The station hungers. But it's not mindless hunger. It's working towards something, a goal that spans dimensions." Her uniform rippled, and I realized it wasn't cloth at all, but rather a layer of her skin textured to look like fabric. "The prisoners," she continued, "they knew things. Secrets about the spaces between spaces. The director thought she could control them, study them, but they were already controlling us. From the moment they arrived, they were changing us, preparing us." The security screens behind her flickered to life, showing feeds from the cells. Most were empty, their interiors warped and stained with impossible colors, but some contained things that moved, shapes that cast shadows in multiple directions simultaneously, beings that existed partially in our reality and partially elsewhere. "Block A was for the standard inmates," the guard said, a voice taking on an echo as if multiple versions of her were speaking slightly out of sync. "The ones who could still pass for normal. Block B held the ones in mid-transformation. But Block C?" She smiled, her teeth refracting light like prisms. "Block C is where we kept the successes." A klaxon suddenly blared, a sound that seemed to come from inside my own head, rather than any speakers. The guard's smile widened impossibly. "Shift change," she said. "Reality is about to get a bit fluid. I suggest you run." The floor beneath my feet began to soften, the metal flowing like quicksand. Through the windows, I could see the cell block beginning to rotate along axes that shouldn't exist, the spiral patterns spinning into configurations that made my mind scream in protest. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I sprinted for the exit, hearing the guard's laughter Doppler behind me, as if she was simultaneously getting closer and further away. The corridor ahead split into 3 identical paths, then 5, then 12, each one promising escape or damnation with equal probability. Behind me, cell doors were opening. From within them came sounds no human throat could make, a chorus of multi-dimensional voices, singing in frequencies that made my vision blur. The prisoners were awake, and they were hungry after their long containment. I chose a path at random and ran, my helmet's heads-up display fritzing with interference. The station's internal sensors were going haywire, showing temperature readings in negative numbers that shouldn't be possible, and pressure differentials that would have torn the station apart if they were real. The path led me to a massive circular chamber that my map identified as a junction between cell blocks. The walls were lined with containment pods, their surfaces covered in warning labels in multiple languages, some of which appeared to be written in 4 dimensions. In the center of the room stood a control station, its screens displaying what looked like migration patterns, but not of creatures moving through space. These were beings moving between realities. "Welcome to processing," announced the new voice. Not the medical AI or the guard, but something deeper, older. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, which were beginning to breathe in steady, rhythmic pulses. "Please proceed to your assigned reality for integration." The containment pods began to open, releasing their contents into the chamber. What emerged were not prisoners in any conventional sense. They were possibilities given form, probabilities made flesh. Each one represented a different path of evolution, a different way that matter and consciousness could be arranged. And they were all looking at me. My hand found the second quantum stabilizer on my belt, my last one. But before I could activate it, one of the creatures spoke. Not in words, but in concepts that bloomed directly in my mind. "Your brother," it communicated. "We can see him across all possible timelines. In most, he dies. In some, he becomes something glorious. Would you like to know how to save him?" The offer hung in the air like a physical thing, a temptation made manifest. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. I had seconds to make a decision that would affect not just my reality, but countless others. "Show me," I heard myself say, even as every survival instinct screamed against it. The creature's response was immediate and overwhelming. Reality fractured around me like a broken mirror, each shard showing a different version of my brother. I saw him dying in countless hospital beds, his body rejecting the nanites. I saw him transformed into something beautiful and terrible, his consciousness expanded across multiple dimensions. I saw him ascending beyond the constraints of physical form, becoming pure energy, pure thought. But in every version where he survived, where he thrived, there was a price. The changes never stopped with him. They spread, infecting reality itself, turning our universe inside out as the barriers between dimensions collapsed. "No," I whispered, my hand tightening on the quantum stabilizer. "Not like this." The creature's disappointment manifested as a wave of cold that frosted the inside of my helmet. "You choose poorly across so many timelines," it communicated. "Perhaps this is why you're perfect for our needs." I activated the stabilizer just as multiple realities began to converge on my position. The device hummed to life, creating a bubble of normalized space-time around me. The creatures recoiled, their forms twisting as they were forced to exist in just one dimension. But the stabilizer's effect was limited, both in range and duration. I had maybe 5 minutes before its power cell died, and the chamber's exit was on the far side of a room full of interdimensional horrors. I ran. The stabilizer's field moved with me, forcing reality to behave normally within its radius. But at the edges of the field, I could see the true nature of the station. The walls weren't walls at all, but rather membranes between dimensions, pulsing with dark energy. The floor rippled with patterns that extended into geometries I couldn't comprehend. The creatures pursued me, but they couldn't enter the stabilizer's field without being forced into forms that could exist in our reality, forms that were clearly painful for them. Their screams echoed through dimensions, creating harmonics that made my teeth vibrate in their sockets. I reached a heavy security door marked Block C, maximum security, reality anchors required beyond this point. The warning made me laugh, a slightly hysterical sound. The entire station was untethered from reality. What could be so dangerous it needed additional anchoring? The door's control panel was smeared with something that looked like mercury, but moved with purpose. I wiped it clean with my gloved hand and felt the substance try to crawl up my arm before the stabilizer's field forced it into inert liquid metal. The security system activated with a hum that resonated at frequencies just below human hearing. Caution, it announced, in a voice that seemed to come from multiple timelines simultaneously. Block C contains entities classified as reality-bending apex predators. Proper containment protocols must be observed. Behind me, the pursuing creatures had stopped. They hovered at the edge of the stabilizer's field, their forms shifting between states of matter I had no words to describe. But they weren't attacking. They were waiting. The door began to open, revealing darkness beyond. But it was wrong darkness, deeper than the mere absence of light. It was the darkness of spaces between spaces, of realities that existed in the gaps between moments. My stabilizer's power indicator dropped to 20%. Soon the bubble of normalized reality around me would collapse, and I would be exposed to whatever laws of physics the station chose to impose. I had to make a choice: retreat back through the known horrors behind me, or press forward into whatever waited in Block C. The decision was made for me as something reached out from the darkness. It wasn't a tentacle, though that's what my mind tried to categorize it as. It was more like a line of probability made solid, a trajectory of could-have-beens given physical form. It wrapped around my stabilizer field, not trying to penetrate it, but rather exploring its surface with an intelligence that felt ancient and alien. "Come," whispered a voice that existed in the space between thoughts. "Let us show you what your species can become." The stabilizer's field flickered, power dropping to 15%. Through the door, I could see shapes moving in the impossible darkness. Things that had once been the station's most dangerous prisoners now evolved into entities that defied classification. What happened next would determine not just my fate, but potentially the fate of all realities that touched this cursed station. The stabilizer's hum grew weaker, and the darkness reached for me with infinite patience. At 10% power, the stabilizer's field began to collapse. Reality rushed in like water through a cracking dam, and I felt my mind strain to process what my senses were reporting. The darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with beings that existed in spectrums, beyond human perception, their forms constantly shifting between states of possibility. The thing that had wrapped around my stabilizer field revealed itself. It had once been human, parts of it still were, in the same way that humans still carry vestigial tails. I saw fragments of a prison uniform, patches of skin, even a face that kept recurring throughout its impossible geometry. But these human elements were just anchors for something far vaster, a consciousness that had expanded beyond the constraints of single-dimensional existence. Dr. Elena Volkov, it said, using a voice that existed in multiple frequencies simultaneously. Former director of Prison Station Elysium, though titles mean little when one has transcended the concept of individual identity. The stabilizer died with a final, pathetic whimper. I waited for the horror to overwhelm me, for reality to tear my mind apart. Instead, I felt a strange clarity. The beings around me were allowing me to perceive them in ways my brain could process, like gods taking on lesser forms to communicate with mortals. The prison was never meant to contain, Volkov's many-formed being continued. It was meant to incubate. We discovered something in the spaces between realities, patterns of existence that could rewrite the very laws of physics. The prisoners were our test subjects, but they became so much more. Images flooded my mind. The first experiments, the discovery of entities that existed in quantum superpositions, beings that could fold space and time like origami. The prisoners hadn't been criminals, in the conventional sense. They were beings that had naturally begun to evolve beyond three-dimensional existence. The prison was built to study them, to learn their secrets. But you couldn't control them, I said, understanding flooding in. They weren't specimens. They were advanced scouts for something larger. Volkov's form rippled with what might have been appreciation. Very good. The entities we discovered weren't random anomalies. They were part of a vast, multidimensional ecosystem. And humanity, in its current form, is nothing but larvae. We're meant to evolve, to transcend. These beings came to guide us. The darkness around us pulsed with movement. Other transformed prisoners emerged, each one a unique expression of evolutionary paths humanity might take. Some were beautiful in their impossibility, others terrifying in their alien perfection. All of them were watching, waiting. "Your brother," Volkov said, parts of her form synchronizing into something almost human. "His condition isn't a disease. The nanites in his blood aren't failing, they're trying to transform him. He's one of the rare humans naturally capable of surviving the evolution. That's why you were chosen for this mission, why you were led here." A screen of curved metal formed from the station's living walls, showing my brother in his hospital bed. But now I could see what the doctors had missed. The nanites weren't attacking his body. They were preparing it for metamorphosis. In the spaces between moments, his form flickered with potential, showing glimpses of what he could become. "The station brings out what's already inside us," Volkov explained. "It accelerates the natural evolution some humans are already undergoing. Your brother is changing. You carry the same potential. Join us, help us guide humanity toward its true destiny." "And if I refuse?" The beings around us shifted, their movements creating interference patterns in reality itself. "Then you leave," Volkov said simply. "Return to your ship. Watch your brother either transcend alone or die fighting the change. Live out your life in a reality that's already beginning to fracture as more humans start to evolve. The change is coming, with or without the station's help. We simply offer guidance through the metamorphosis." As if to emphasize her point, the station shuddered. Through the walls, I could see other realities bleeding through, versions of Earth where humanity had already begun to change, timelines where the barriers between dimensions had crumbled entirely. The future was a kaleidoscope of evolutionary possibilities, and I was standing at the crossroads. "Let me show you something first," Volkov said, her form extending tendrils of probability. "The true heart of the station, the source of the change. Then you can decide." The floor beneath us became transparent, revealing a vast chamber below. At its center was something that defied description, a quantum singularity that existed in all possible states simultaneously. It pulsed with energy that seemed to flow between dimensions, each beat sending ripples through the fabric of reality. "The gateway," Volkov's voice reverberated through my bones. "The key to humanity's evolution. Come, let me show you how to use it." The journey down to the gateway chamber defied physics. We didn't so much descend as shift through layers of reality, each one bleeding into the next like watercolors in rain. My mind struggled to process what my eyes were reporting. Spaces that were bigger on the inside than the outside. Corridors that looped back on themselves in impossible ways. The gateway grew larger as we approached, its presence distorting space-time around it. It wasn't just a quantum singularity, it was a tear in the universe itself, a window into dimensions beyond human comprehension. The energy it radiated felt almost alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. "The prisoners helped us build it," Volkov explained, her form shifting through multiple states as she spoke. "Or rather, they helped us understand that it was already here, waiting to be discovered. The station formed around it naturally, like a pearl growing around a grain of sand." The chamber itself was vast, its walls lined with equipment that looked more grown than manufactured. Cables and conduits wrapped around the gateway like veins, pulsing with energy that flowed in both directions. But it was the things moving around the gateway that caught my attention, beings that made the transformed prisoners above look mundane by comparison. They were the success stories, Volkov explained without words. The ones who had fully embraced the change, who had transcended Not just physical form, but the very concept of individual existence. They moved through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their consciousnesses expanded beyond human comprehension. "Your brother wouldn't suffer during the transformation," Volkov said, reading my thoughts. "The gateway can guide the process, make it beautiful rather than traumatic. He could be like them." She gestured to the transcended beings. Free from pain, free from the limitations of human flesh. I watched as one of the beings interacted with the gateway. It merged with the energy field, its consciousness expanding across multiple realities simultaneously. For a moment I could see through its eyes, infinite possibilities, infinite variations of existence all happening at once. It was beautiful and terrifying. "But it doesn't stop with him, does it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Once the process starts, it spreads." "Evolution always spreads," Volkov replied. "That's its nature. The strong survive and adapt. The weak remain behind. Humanity is standing on the brink of its next great leap forward. We can either embrace it or be left behind in a universe that's already moving beyond us." She showed me more visions. Futures where humanity had evolved, where we had transcended the barriers between dimensions. In some, we had become beings of pure energy and thought. In others, we existed in states that defied classification. Our consciousness spread across multiple realities simultaneously. But I also saw the cost. Those who couldn't adapt, who couldn't make the transition, left behind in a world that increasingly made no sense. Reality itself would begin to break down as more humans evolved, the barriers between dimensions weakening with each transformation. "It's already happening," Volkov said, her voice echoing with the weight of multiple timelines. "The nanites in your brother's blood, they're not unique. Similar changes are occurring naturally in humans across the galaxy. The gateway can help us control the process, guide it. Without guidance, the transformation will be chaos." As if to emphasize her point, the gateway pulsed, sending ripples of probability cascading through the chamber. I saw myself reflected in them, infinite versions of Juno Rook, each one having made a different choice in this moment. Some transformed, becoming vast and terrible and beautiful. Others remained human, watching as reality crumbled around them. "The choice isn't whether humanity will evolve," Volkov said, her form stabilizing into something almost human again. "The choice is whether we guide that evolution or let it happen randomly, with all the horror that would entail. Your brother is just the beginning. Help us. Help them." She extended what might have been a hand, a convergence of probabilities that took the form of an offered blessing or curse. Through the gateway, I could see the truth of her words. The universe was changing, reality itself shifting, as consciousness evolved beyond its current constraints. I thought of my brother, of the pain he'd endured. I thought of humanity, standing unknowingly on the brink of an evolutionary leap that would redefine the very concept of existence. And I thought of myself, here in this impossible place, facing a decision that would ripple across multiple dimensions. The gateway pulsed again, stronger this time. Reality bent around us, showing glimpses of what could be, what might be, what was already becoming. The station itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my choice. I reached out my hand and activated the final device on my belt, an emergency beacon designed to cut through any interference. The signal burst outward, rippling through dimensions, carrying with it a warning that no one might ever be able to read. "Interesting choice," Volkov said, her form fragmenting into recursive patterns of disappointment, but futile. The signal won't reach anyone in time. The process has already begun. The gateway pulsed in agreement, its energy field expanding. Through it, I could see the changes spreading across human space, subtle at first, then accelerating. Reality was becoming fluid. boundaries dissolving as more humans began to undergo the transformation. "You're right about one thing," I said, backing away from her outstretched probability hand. "We can't stop evolution, but we can choose how to evolve. And this," I gestured at the transformed beings around us, "this isn't evolution, it's invasion." The chamber's atmosphere changed instantly. The transcended beings stopped their ethereal dance around the gateway, their attention focusing on me, with an intensity that felt like physical pressure. "The prisoners," I continued, the truth crystallizing in my mind. "They weren't just test subjects or scouts, they were seeds. Plant enough of them in enough realities, let them transform their jailers, and suddenly you have footholds across multiple dimensions. The station isn't a prison or a laboratory. It's an incubator for infiltration." Volkov's form stretched into geometries that expressed amusement and threat simultaneously. "Very good. But knowing the truth doesn't change anything. The process cannot be stopped. Even now your brother's nanites are preparing him for transcendence. The only choice is whether to embrace the change or be broken by it." I reached into my suit's utility pouch and pulled out what looked like a simple data crystal. "You showed me multiple futures, multiple possibilities, but you didn't show me all of them, did you? You only showed me the futures where your kind wins." The crystal hummed to life, projecting lines of code into the space between us. It was the emergency shutdown protocol I'd discovered in the control room's corrupted data, not meant for the station's systems, but for the gateway itself. "Impossible," Volkov's voice resonated across multiple frequencies. "Those codes were destroyed across all timelines." "Almost all timelines," I corrected. "You forgot about the mundane ones. The boring possibilities where a simple salvage operator got lucky. The futures you thought weren't worth watching." The crystal's code began to interact with the gateway's energy field. The transformed beings moved to stop me, their forms warping space itself in their haste. But they had forgotten what it meant to be limited, to be human. They had evolved beyond physical constraints, but also beyond understanding the power of desperate human choice. I smashed the crystal. Reality fractured. The gateway's rhythm faltered, its perfect quantum harmony disrupted by the shutdown code. The energy field collapsed in on itself, creating a cascade of dimensional failures. The transcended beings screamed in frequencies that existed outside of normal spacetime. "You doom your own species." Volkov's many-formed being began to dissolve. "Without guidance, the evolution will be chaos." "Maybe," I agreed, watching as the chamber began to collapse, space-time rebounding violently as the gateway lost cohesion. "But it will be our chaos, our choice, our evolution." The station shuddered as dimension after dimension began to seal itself off. The beings that had transcended found themselves suddenly trapped between realities, their expanded consciousness fragmenting as the bridges between worlds crumbled. I ran, through corridors that were rapidly remembering how to exist in only 3 dimensions, past cells where reality was knitting itself back together. The station's living walls calcified, becoming mere metal again. The impossible geometries simplified themselves, folding back into normal space. Behind me, I could hear the death of possibilities, the sounds of futures being pruned, of evolutionary paths being closed off. The station was returning to what it had once been, or perhaps becoming something entirely new. I reached my ship just as the docking clamps released themselves, their quantum locks failing as reality stabilized. The artificial gravity flickered, trying to remember how to operate under normal physical laws. As I initiated launch sequences, I switched on my ship's long-range scanners. They showed the station beginning to fade, not disappearing, but rather settling back into a single dimension, a single reality. The gateway's influence was receding, its promise of guided evolution collapsing into mere potential once again. My brother would have to fight his own battle with the nanites now, but it would be a human battle, bound by human rules and human choices. Whatever humanity would become, it would become on its own terms. The station disappeared from my senses completely as I engaged my engines. In my final glimpse, I saw it changing one last time, becoming something that could exist in normal space, its impossibilities locked away behind walls of conventional physics. As I set course for home, I thought about the futures I'd seen, the possibilities that now would never be. Humanity might still evolve, might still transcend its current limitations, but it would do so naturally, gradually, through choices made, one at a time, by individuals facing their own moments of transformation. I sent out a final broadcast, a warning to any other salvage operators who might discover the station in the future. Some prisons are meant to stay locked, some doors are meant to stay closed, and some evolutions are best left to time itself. The stars stretched into lines as my ship jumped to faster than light speed. Behind me, in the vast darkness between realities, I thought I heard something like laughter, or perhaps it was just the sound of possibilities closing, of futures choosing themselves, of humanity continuing its slow, uncertain journey toward whatever it would eventually become. On my ship's medical scanner, my own vitals showed strange readings, patterns that shouldn't exist in human biology. The choice to evolve, it seemed, was becoming personal. But that was a horror for another day.